evening and welcome to Season 5, Episode 9 of Inside the Rookery. We are talking to Bee Scerri, producer, writer, designer, and generally all-round epic and awesome human being. We are really happy to have you back, Bee.
Thank you. Really happy to be back.
Excellent. We shall just, it has indeed. We should just take a note that while for us in Scotland it is as warm as it ever gets in Scotland, for Bee it is 4 a.m. in winter, and that's just quite sad for them. But
Yeah.
We salute your commitment.
We salute your commitment.
And I say, ha ha!
Classic Andy.
Classic Andy.
Yeah, what a dick.
So welcome back to the stream, Bee. It's been
Thank
so
you.
long. What have you been up to since we last chatted with you?
Yeah, quite a bit. A lot of writing, and that sort of culminated around the end of last year and beginning of this year as me putting together So Below, which you can see that I'm shelling for lovely, and yeah, running a commercial game online. That was sort of a really big project, a really long process in the making. So yeah, it's finally launched, which is lovely and doing well. We had our 50th session last week, I think. So that's going pretty well.
Brilliant. And we will have some questions specifically about So Below and the setting later on. But before that, we've got quite a lot of questions pre-submitted about the topic that we decided to chat about, which is a West Marches campaign and how to run one and what your experience has been like and what recommendations you have. So as always, we have plenty of questions pre-submitted by our lovely Discord community and patrons. But as always, I can see we've already got a few people in the chat. Oh, bless. John says, we literally finished this So Below session just 6 hours ago. The commitment.
It was pretty intense too.
Well, maybe we'll hear about that. And yeah, so if you've got any comments or questions, pop them up in the chat. And just like that, I will bring them up on stream.
And is John one of the players?
Yeah. So they're one of our players. With a slowly growing massive roster of characters that they're playing,
Nice.
Lots of alts. So yeah.
Well, that might be interesting in that obviously there's going to be a lot of questions asking you about the specifics of GMing a West Marches campaign, but we've actually got a player who could maybe give the player perspective in the chat. That might be quite interesting.
So, if you're up for that, John, I know you're well versed to answering questions, usually around about this time whilst I'm asleep. So if you're comfortable.
Brilliant. Well, let us get into it, shall we? Here is the first question from, it wouldn't be our stream if the first question wasn't from Seagoat. And Seagoat asks, so what is a West Marches campaign? What specifics define a West Marches game?
Yeah, so good question. It's sort of a weird campaign structure philosophy that first gained notoriety around, I think, 2007, when a designer, Ben Robbins, posted up a series of articles on his blog called Ars Ludi. And that's been sort of like refined and developed on several times since then, most notably in 2014 by ItMeJP's roleplay series run by the incredible Stephen Lumpkin, a very dear friend. And then in, I think, 2017 or so by Matt Colville, he sort of repopularized it. But essentially it's at its heart really the like original old school way of running games, just needlessly defined as it sort of tends to be in a sort of more indie context. But that definition is really helpful for like solidifying and iterating on those principles, which is that you don't have the sort of traditional campaign structure of the GM presenting a mission or a scenario, and then the players playing through that chunk through a session, and then the following session continuing on from where you left off. Instead, you have a hub town. In Sobolow's case, that's the little village of Sigurd, or it could be sort of the village you find yourself in, the hamlet in Darkest Dungeon, that kind of vibe. And then you go out on missions, on forays, out into a vast unexplored wilderness. In Sobolow's case, that's represented with a hex map, but it could be, a more traditional overland travel, or, a point crawl, whatever it might be. And the cast of characters changes from session to session as well. You typically have a very large pool of players. In Sobolow's case, I think we're sitting at around 20 to 25 at the moment. But I've seen, West Marches games with over 100 players. I think, Andy, you were telling me about one that was up to like 300 or so a few months back, which is bananas, but that is what it is. And they as a pool of players decide what they want to do out in the world, whether that's just a simple, we want to pick a direction and go as fast as we can in that direction and see what we discover on the map, or if it's following like a particular rumor that's come up previously. They decide their objectives and traditionally when they want to play as well. Like they sort of will gather together, create a party, and then pitch to the GMs when they're going to play. And then we have a little sort of self-contained couple of hours of exploration and dealing with whatever problem they chose to tackle. And then at the end, we return back to the hub and update our rumors. And in our case, have I think it was 198 messages I woke up to in the tap room of Sobolow this morning because I stole one of the PCs. they've gone somewhere. So yeah, it can be a bit of a hectic style of campaign, but it's very player driven, and very like focused on player autonomy and agency out there.
It's fascinating, really interesting. Sorry, Andy, on you go.
I find the whole concept of them fascinating because I used to run a games club back when I was wee. So we're talking before I came to Games Workshop first time. I was a teenager, and I had about 100 or so members in that, and we must have run about 5 or 6 different campaigns which sort of fit the definition of West Marches. One of them was just one which was a campaign loosely off of whoever turns up gets to play, but it was an ongoing underpinning plot. Another one was one that was run with 4 or 5 GMs, which were all working together towards an overall plot, and they were swapping parties with whoever turned up each week. And it's really fascinating to watch it from the outside and see how it slowly codified and became a thing, rather than just something where beforehand GMs would just do whatever. It was such a loose, ill-defined space in gaming because people were still learning what role-playing was back in the 80s and into the 90s and defining it for themselves and how it worked at their tables. And some games came along and said, no, it's this. It's definitely this. This is how you play. We're going to commodify it in this direction. And this is how we want you to take it to your table. Where often what was happening in clubs was almost the opposite, because the realities of the games that they wanted to play with the people that were there were so far removed from the very fixed 5 players every week meeting. And it's really interesting to watch that ill-defined mess of ideas be slowly defined in lots of different pools. And I have nothing more to say other than fascinating.
It's that was actually one of the early criticisms of West March's design, was that there was a very like grognard pushback against it, because this is how we actually played, back in the day anyway. So this is nothing new. And Ben Robbins then came out with like, it was never intended to be something new. It's just a defined version of it. And
So Seagoat has a follow-up question in the chat. So what would differentiate a West Marches game from the D&D and PF organized play games? Is it the player's choice rather than the GM running them through a prepared scenario?
Yeah, definitely. So West Marches games can have little pockets of prepared adventures out there, and I've seen a lot of people make essentially like, you know, a portfolio of one-page dungeons and things like that, like short one-evening adventures, and then pepper their hex map or wilderness, whatever, with those encounters. So Below does a kind of similar thing, although we have a lot of interconnected plots, and it's a part of my design philosophy to link everything out there to at least two other things out there. Very much stemming off the the Andy Law School of Design, but you know, that's showing my lineage there. But I think the main difference would be that a West Marches game encourages a consistent community, even though there's like the party is not consistent necessarily between session to session. You have the same pool of players the whole time, which will grow or shrink as players come and go, because it is a very drop in, drop out kind of thing. But those players learn each other's strengths. They learn the sort of like characters that they work well with, and you start to see inter-party relationships spanning over a village, which is really fun to see. We've got a lot of role play going on between sessions and things like that, which feeds into our forays. So whilst it's not going down a prepared adventure path like Pathfinder Organized Play or Adventurers League, things like that, it is all playing within the same sandbox that everyone is engaged in, even if they're not necessarily on each mission.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it's interesting. It reminds me a bit of our experience LARPing, when we had a big community LARPing in Edinburgh, except with LARPing, obviously, you couldn't particularly go play. Well, sometimes we had field trips, but you were centered in the city, and you were centered usually in that one pub that you could book like a venue, right? But that idea of you were,
or the student union,
or the student union, whatever you could get your hands on. But the idea of it being a community and the inter-party stuff going on between. But more of
definitely.
a party driven than LARPing, which tended to be more, I always felt, solo.
Yeah. Well, even from that like link to LARP is actually really poignant, because I find personally, and this may be different from the player's point of view, but for me, a lot of play for this style of campaign seems to be done not during the sessions, but in the sort of the rumor mongering that happens between it, when you know, people are asking like, what did you do? What did you get up to? And what threats do you remember last time you fought the frog god, and things like this, and what did they do, and all of these things. It feels very similar to that debrief stage of a LARP, when you find out all of the stories that everyone else was doing out there that you had no idea was going on, whilst you were, in my experience, getting locked in prison every single session of every LARP you've ever played. My own fault. I'm not blaming anyone. I've been committing too many LARP crimes. So.
Well, John, one of your players says, sorry, our out of session RP has gotten so lively that some players need up to 20 minutes at the beginning of the session just working through the emotional baggage of whatever happened in their recent text RP. Like, are you looking into my life in LARPing in the 90s, Johnny's? Like, the drama.
I'd like to add a little extra on this one as well from the GM side, because I have found campaigns of this ilk are one of the most useful ways of developing your improvisational GM skills. So often, particularly people who are coming into GMing for the first time, they'll play something that's pre-written, and their first questions are often, but what do I do if it goes in this direction or that direction? And for someone who's been through any sort of campaign like this, it seems like an almost nonsensical question, because that's the entire game and it's what you're used to doing. And trying to construct an answer that's useful to that's often just, well, you just make this shit up, don't you? Okay, how do I make that actually comprehensible and useful for them? But it's really, really good for keeping your GMing interesting, exciting, and building stories off the cuff. So yeah.
And there are tools definitely that have been developed out there to support that kind of play, because it can be very daunting sort of looking at such a large sandbox and thinking that you have to have it all in your head at the same time, or none of it in your head and then improvise all of it. Like that can get very daunting.
So Zoltan has asked, before starting a West Marches campaign, what should a GM prepare? And then we've got a few other questions about GM tools and various GM bits and bobs.
Good question. What should a GM prepare? Well, I mean, I think the sort of the golden setup for a fantasy land style campaign is always to have your home base and to have like a engaging immediate environs. When it comes to West Marches, you want people to leave that home base almost as quickly as possible. One of the sort of core tenets of West Marches is that adventure doesn't happen at home. You have to leave home to have like an engaging experience. In practice, I've never actually seen a West Marches campaign that has held to that pillar completely. Players love dragging problems home with them, even if almost always the first thing that players ask is, can we build a wall around the town? They then invite the big bad evil guy into, well, in my case, move them in next door, but that's a whole other story. The main thing is to get that like immediate environs around your players within a couple of days of travel in whatever your rule system is, peppered through with enough things that sort of if they go in any of the cardinal directions, they're likely to bump into something. So on a hex map, that typically means if you're putting your hub town at a map edge, then that typically means plan like 4 things. So that's 4 one-page adventures, essentially. A scrap of wilderness around, and a vague idea of what the world outside of that would look like. You can definitely prep significantly more than that, but I don't think you need to. And I don't even think it's necessarily useful unless that's how your brain works. For me, I like to do a very top-down design, but I would not advise that for anyone other than those who like digging into wind maps and shit like that just because it's fun. So so don't do that.
I'd add an extra recommendation on that as well, and that's that you can play it as I often think of it in the back of my head, the old Mighty Empires way. And this is an old game from Games Workshop back in the late 80s, early 90s, maybe early 90s. And basically every hex you go into is randomized. And it takes an awful lot of the weight off of the GM preparation, in that you can build yourself the random tables that match the sort of world you're looking for. And that means as the players explore, you're also exploring, and it can help your engagement with the game. Where if you've already built it all and the players don't go in the directions you want, it can sometimes be weirdly frustrating watching the players fumble around getting nowhere. Well, you're like, no, my plot's just there, you dicks. Hurry up and move. Where if you've got it randomized, they are as excited by whatever crazy thing pops up as you are. As you suddenly go, right, well, there's a freaking temple here. Awesome. Well, let's figure out how that temple comes out into pass into the game. And you can obviously do the same prep, your one-page sheets for different things that will pop up. But you can also have your overarching, let's say, bigger arcs of plot tied into when they discover that random point or that random point or that random point. And that can make it as much a game for you as it can for a player, because I found quite a few, I'm not going to say West March's style games that I played in, because they weren't. They were just different games. But I found several of those campaigns have petered out because of GM apathy as well. And it's one way of trying to keep your own interest in what's going on. Let's hopefully say solid rather than just, I'm bored now, time to move on.
So Bee, what made you decide to run a West March's style game, and what benefits do you feel it gives you as a GM, as a creator?
So for So Below in particular, it was sort of a natural fit. So So Below is a commercial game. It's now almost solely my full-time job, which is kind of wild to say. Which obviously means, it's a paid game. So the West Marches format really supported that kind of style of having a very low commitment to entry sort of campaign. You can come in and play a single session, test the waters, see what it's like. Or you can play as many sessions in a week as you would like to. It gives me the flexibility to sort of nail down 6 to 8 or so slots in which to run, and then fill them with whatever the players want. So in a weird way, it allows me to focus on prep from a very top-down approach. I know where they might go, so I'll just prep all of those things, and then they figure out where they want to go. And then next week, I've already prepped all of the places that they might go. So then I'll just do the next rim out, and I'll keep going further and further, which very much helps with the tying things into multiple things on the map. And
how much do your players document stuff themselves? I'm always obsessed with a lot of players keep notebooks, but they're kind of generally out of character scrawl messes that may or may not be helpful in future as you frantically reference your memory. But it strikes me that it would be a really good vehicle for actual documentation, maps that were player created, little almanacs that were player created, that you could then come back to in your next West Marches campaign, a generation later, and
for sure,
some of that stuff. That might be really nice.
We haven't seen terribly many things like almanacs and things like that. We do have a few examples of sort of in-character documents that have been written, lab notes, but we have a very active, as John says, we have a very active rumor mill, which is completely player driven. There's a template that I've put together for people to sort of write more targeted rumors, because right at the beginning it was just essentially people screaming about things being in different directions, and it was chaos. But most of the documentation for the game that is player facing comes in either wiki entries, which I write up as part of my prep, and then exposed to the players when a piece becomes relevant, or through the sort of players cobbling together their knowledge themselves. So it's quite eclectic in a way that I think is very thematic for sitting in a tap room with a bunch of typically drunk adventurers complaining about what almost killed them last week, kind of thing. So it's quite fun.
And do you have any, Zoltan asks, are there any tools you'd recommend to help GMs? World Anvil jumps out as something that might be useful.
World Anvil is what we use for the wiki to host things. The the timeline feature in particular is particularly useful. Had I done things slightly differently from the beginning, I would have implemented the Chronicle system through World Anvil, and I highly recommend anyone who's thinking of doing a West Marches game, get your map into World Anvil like as soon as possible. That should be like step one of prep, and tie it to that Chronicle system, because that looks incredible for like moving out into the wilderness and exactly documenting where and when things happen. Beyond that, though, I think one of the tools that I use the most would be Donjon's tool suite, which I can get a link for if that would be useful. But it's just sorry.
Yep.
Okay, yeah, I'll grab that for you. So yeah, the Donjon suite is just like an infinite amount of random generators, which are scattered around for different things, like name generators and town generators, encounter generators, things like that. Very useful for prep. In particular, I follow a philosophy called blob design when I'm running. So there's less improvisation at the table when it comes to things like encounters and things like that. Definitely heavy with the interactions of pre-planned encounters, but everything that the players sort of see from a mechanical or like token or map base was laid down in stone and then run as is, and the sort of players work around the world as it is. So Donjon really helps for that kind of prep and inspiration. And the weather generator on that in particular, I do use whole cloth, which is very useful for things going wrong. I would also heavily suggest people get Hexographer, although I think that it has been renamed to Worldographer now when it was re-released. But Hexographer is just a very very simple, very easy to use hex mapping piece of software that you can download, and it's free. I have actually finally, after about probably 15 years of using it, finally purchased a license for it, and I can highly recommend doing that if you do want to go down this route, because it just makes it so much easier to customize that map and grow it as the players explore. Trying to think of any other tools that I use heavily.
Well, I've got a question that might talk about logistical tools, because I think Seagoat is kind of getting at here. If I decide I want to run a West Marches style game, how would I go about organizing this? I think Seagoat's kind of getting at more logistically there.
Sure.
How do you get the players? How do you manage that? And there's a few other questions we'll come to as well.
So on a like basic logistical level, Discord is the in my opinion the best way to organize the community. And within that Discord, make sure that you've got a channel for like general chatter. Ours is the tap room. One for sharing rumors in particular. The rumor mill for us. Having an in character sort of role play space is apparently very important. That was a request early on. And then having a separate space out for like actually running the sessions. So we have that tied to a role. When your sort of session's coming up, we flag you with that role, and then you get access to a voice and a chat channel, and then when the session comes around, you can jump into that. If you want to do this as a commercial thing, Start Playing, which is a website, startplaying.games, perhaps, I don't know. One word, Start Playing at least, is a really easy tool to use to sort of like set up your campaign in that way. It's also good if you don't want to charge for your sessions, if you just want to have a hub in which to host them. My recommendation would be to create a single adventure on there, title it as One Shot / like West Marches style game, and then create multiple sessions for that adventure when you have slots available, and then players can fill them up. You've got some discoverability on start playing that way, so people will be able to see your adventure when it's coming up and maybe jump in and then join your Discord, etc. But
and Bee, I know that safety is really important to you. You know, we talked about it when, you know, quite a while ago now when you were staying with us. So can you talk me through, as someone coming to that, how would they feel safe? How do you vet people? What is that? How do you make a safe community for people?
Yeah, that is a really, really good question. I don't know how to say this without sounding strange, but I suppose the crushing weight of a positive community is self-stabilizing in my experience. Those early the early days of the community are by far the most important thing to get settled. Those founding members are really, really important. You want to make sure to be inviting in people who you know and trust as the sort of first initial players, and you know and trust them to be welcoming beyond anything else, welcoming and excited to bring other people into the community to share what is going on in that community, and to definitely have a lot of patience, because you're going to meet lots of new people, and in a lot of cases you will not know anything about them before you begin playing with them. So that like initial setup for the community is really, really important. But then beyond that, it is largely self-regulating in my experience.
It's like a community. Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah. Having a strong set of very explicit and very, I guess, almost like militant sort of pillars of your community is also important. So, for example, in our community, we have the welcome space where like new players pop into the Discord, which has a list of the things the community stands for and what it stands against. That same list is on the World Anvil and on the Start Playing. Like, it's very front and center at every stage, and that's super explicit in like standing for being a fan of each other's play, like each other's play characters, for exploration, things like that, and then like firmly against transphobia and queerphobia, and quite a like exhaustive list of like hardline statements. Having a handful of safety tools as well at your disposal is always a good way to go. So we use the X card and the sort of like red, yellow, green light method, as well as that's sort of tied into lines and veils for us. They have come up very, very sparingly. I don't actually think we've ever been X carded at any point in time. And I am very hopeful that that's because no one has felt the need to use an X card instead of feeling that need and not using it. But lines and veils have been very useful. We've done that from a point of view of an anonymous presentation. Like there's I can't remember the name of the tool, but if you search up like anonymous presentation feedback on Google, you should be able to find something where essentially it acts as a server for people to anonymously ask questions or things like that, raise their hand for a presentation, and then it's like saved on a consistent server. So that's a way that people can flag things that they might be uncomfortable with, and then lines and veils will just add to the world. Like it will mean that the world does not, that it for whatever reason there is never going to be harm towards children, things like that. It just doesn't exist. So that's been very, very useful. And then I think the last thing is just being really actively engaged in the sort of experiences of the players. We definitely encourage everyone to have cameras and like mics is necessary because we play over Discord voice. But we encourage everyone to put their video on. Some people choose not to, which is fine. But keeping an eye on those visual cues is also really, really important, because every now and then you can see that there might be like a slight shift in response and then a quick check-in. We actually had that last session when it came to some undead rotting monkey skeleton things. Just, like little things that you don't expect people might have an issue with, and then it does, and then you go, okay, cool. Let's see if it's going to be an issue and go from there.
Thanks. I asked because I'm sorry, I just realized I don't know how to pronounce your name. Is it May or is it my? Safe community has always been my largest issue, and I know this person's on our Discord community, and we've talked about that there. So I think it is, in any space you go into, depending on your level of privilege, depends on the level of precautions and checks you need to take. And sometimes people, I knew you would appreciate that, but sometimes people don't appreciate how many checks and how many things you would need to do before you felt safe. So it's great to hear you talk about how you've done it. I think strong foundations is a really
strong foundations is huge.
Strong foundations is huge.
Yeah.
Undead, yes, Eagle says undead rotting skeleton monkey things. A normal day in the world of adventuring.
A normal day, yeah, definitely.
One of them, let's see. One of them just stole my bongos. Not cool.
Yes, you got them back, John. They almost got thrown into the sea, but not quite.
So Zoltan asks, do you run your West Marches campaign as sole GM, or do you have other GMs to help you, as they've seen it done both ways?
Yeah, I just realized that was going to be okay. No, I'll say it. I've done it both ways. I'm just realizing the double entendre coming in there. But let's let it slide. Yeah, so in a previous campaign, I did have, which was a West Marches-ish game, nowhere near as hardline as So Below is. But in that one, we had 3 GMs, and that actually came about because the players wanted to play more frequently than I was able to run. So 2 of the players stepped up to become co-GMs, swearing me to secrecy on core mysteries of the setting, but happy to play like periphery missions out there, which was a lot of fun. But for So Below, it is just a sole GM. There has been some suggestion and some floating around that maybe one day it would be more than that, but there's definitely a logistical battle there to do that, especially given it wasn't set up to be that way. So that would require potentially more work than it might save and open up by having more than one person GMing. The reason why I did it this way for this campaign, though, is just I had a very strong vision for what I wanted the game to be, and as Andy Law can probably appreciate, I was impatient when it came to designing, and I wanted to make it, and I didn't have time to recruit a team. The ADHD hijacked my brain, and I had to make it. So here we are.
So have you got any thoughts if you were to have multiple GMs? You talked about the challenges. So how would you ensure consistency and continuity for players? Asks Sultan.
So I would definitely keep my notes around the hex key more stringent. So we have there are two tools that I've got from a GM facing side when running, which are of differing levels of usefulness, I've now found. But the first is a calendar. I keep a very strict calendar of what's happening in game, with notes on like where they're camping, where they're going, and key that to hex number and things like that. And the other one is that I have a hex key itself. So every hex on the map is listed out, the terrain type there, whatever might be there, what region it's in, things like that. I would be much more stringent with that, and then I would tie those through individually to probably World Anvil links, and then go much more proactive in terms of putting in secrets into the World Anvil side of things so that the GMs would be able to see them. I would also definitely have a private GM area on the Discord, so that there would be a place for constant chatter. And in that, there would be a priority stream where like discussion would be strongly discouraged. It would be mostly for posting and reference when people do things that will have lasting impacts on the setting or on a region. Posted in there as soon as possible after the session is done, so that we know the sky broke, or
another
like
genocide level event.
Exactly. Yeah. No. Again. Yeah. So yeah, that would be really important, and I would probably set up a schedule for some kind of check-in meeting, depending on how frequent sessions were and how the division of running sessions would be. Whether that would be like sort of an even split of everyone kind of running the same amount of sessions, or if it's one person doing the majority and the other couple like picking up slack. Have a cadence for meetings so that everyone can have like a get back to baseline, discuss anything that may come up or maybe be relevant to talk through, and then figure out the plan going forward for making adjustments to other encounters out there to account for that, because that would be a really big thing.
How long has your current one been going on for, both in game and in real life?
Yeah, in real life, we started on January 17. So as of yesterday my time, so as of 6 hours ago when I ran that session, we've been going for 5 months.
Sorry, 5.
Yeah, 5 months. Yeah, with a little bit of a break in the middle due to illness. So thanks for laughing, Andrew. It means a lot. Yeah, so I would say like realistically probably closer to 4.5 months like of actual active running, and that is, we've done 52 sessions thus far. Sessions are 3 to 4 hours, and in game time we are coming up to we just passed a couple of forays ago the 1 year anniversary of the opening of Panker's Folly, the tavern from which they do their forays. So and the opening was the first foray. So yeah, I think we're about a year and a month or two through the campaign, which is pretty exciting. We're coming back up to winter again, so things are going to get very cold.
I'm going to add a little bit extra on the multiple GMs front, because I've done this quite a few times and I have failed quite a few times as well. It's one of those things that can go quite wrong if you're not careful. Because as soon as you bring in more than one mind, you start bringing in potential conflict, as one person wants to go one way and another one wants to go another. So I would generally recommend, beyond all the tools that you use and ensuring that communication is always there, free flowing and getting in place, that you either have a very clear structure, as in whoever is at the top and makes the decisions for everything, to ensure that everything is always pressing forwards, or alternatively, you have a very clear process for conflict resolution, so that can be brought to bear if it needs to be brought to bear. Because I have seen many a game fragment, both ones I've been involved with and also ones that I've been watching from the outside. For example, the one that Bee mentioned right at the beginning of the stream, where he was like, look, there was one with some 300 and odd folks in it. Yeah, that collapsed big style. But it collapsed into several other smaller games, so it didn't collapse completely. But the overall beginning was really cool. And everything they were doing with it was super cool. It's just that, unfortunately, the person that was at the head moved on and left a power vacuum without properly setting up others to come into that. They all had different ideas how to best move forwards, and it was mostly amicable. Yeah. So you got to be careful, and again, strong foundations ensure that you can build something that is equally strong.
Just on that, on the players being the ones who engage and decide. So Killishandra asks, how do you handle players who want to engage with all the campaign versus players who dabble once a month or so? It sounds like that's not an issue, but
so the answer sort of there is I don't. The right at the beginning, I was very concerned about this, and I did spend quite a bit of energy making sure that there was not a disparity there. But I very quickly realized that that was like a needlessly infantilizing is the wrong word, but like needlessly nannying players, especially because it is like such an opt-in structure. Around the fact that it is a commercial game as well, players will play as much as they want. And there's no sense in me worrying about playing too little or too much or anything like that. So long as the players are feeling engaged and empowered that they can properly interact with the world, that's what's really important. So whilst I don't really worry about handling those players, there are things that have been put in place to make sure that players don't fall through the cracks, unless they kind of want to for one reason or another. The biggest one has been to have quite detailed records in the timeline. So after every session, I do a sort of like one paragraph post in the World Anvil timeline that has a link to all of the characters that were on that one, all of the player characters, and a quick rundown of sort of what happened and where they went, with links through to all of those things. And I add those links if it's new locations to my backlog of like go through and resolve them so that there's something clear to read. But also from that, I've made sure to have spaces in the Discord so that there are places for people to communicate and talk, even when they're not sort of getting ready for a foray or just coming off a foray either. So there's ways to be in the community and still engaged in the game, and still playing, definitely like from the way I'm seeing this game, still playing a part of the game, even if you're not in a session. That's definitely important. but again, on that, making sure that there's no pressure coming in that they have to be engaged, letting them be as engaged as they want to be.
Because Seagoat has put a question in the chat that I was wondering about too. So with West March games, I take it everything has to be concluded in a single session, i.e. players travel out, do what they do, and return to base all before the end of the session?
Yes. So we have in-game tools to account for things like that, which I would definitely encourage the GM to come up with some kind of contrivance for the return trip. Travel can take some time, and travel rules are always the sort of like sticking point in games like this. We've written a bespoke system, which is working quite well, which I do eventually want to polish up and publish once it's got all of the little kinks worked out. But I would strongly encourage you to have a travel system that is part of the adventure and is engaging, instead of being what most travel systems tend to be, which is pain that you have to get through to get to the actual adventure. I actually wrote an article about this on my Patreon blog. I can send a link around.
Yeah, do share it.
Pain versus play is a big thing. I come from a background of free-to-play mobile games, so pain versus play is a big deal there, somewhat sadly. But the return trip is quite a difficult prospect, because you do not want it to be a situation of rushing the adventure to then get back home, because whilst the adventure out there, the travel out there can definitely be part of that engaging adventure cycle, return home never really feels right? Like you just have to look at the Return of the Lord of the Rings for sort of that like classic, like we've got a weird meandering story of coming back from saving the world, and whilst it can be engaging, it is a strange story beat. So a contrivance to get people back to the hub immediately, or like hand-wavingly, is very important. Whether that's just
teleport. Woohoo!
Yeah, exactly. Whether it's like you can go because you're like not racing against the clock, you can go safely and you're able to get back without any harm after a weeks of travel or whatever. Or in our case, magical rings blessed by the god of travel and exploration, who is the patron deity of the guild that they're a part, which whisk you back at often riddling and curious moments, which is to say, in brackets, when the session has ended. So yeah, I contrivance like that. Yeah, really important. Really important. That lets us play like right up to the hour, and even go over time if we're really digging it. And then get back without having to worry about that.
It's a classic issue for computer games in general when they're doing RPGs, where they've got their classic adventure cycle, and then they come out and they often go, "Oh, and you just magically return home," the dungeon loops in itself, and you're back at the beginning again.
It's the classic issue for journeys, full stop. Like when you were a kid, right, and you were going on holiday, the return journey was always much shitter than the going journey. Like
exactly.
Like, who wants to go on a train home? But a train somewhere, exciting.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Right. So Kilishandra asks, and she's got another question that's sort of like a double hander. What do you feel is the biggest flaw of a West Marches campaign, and what one warning would you give to anyone considering running their own West Marches campaign?
Ooh. These are tough questions. What's the biggest flaw? what is the biggest flaw of West Marches? I think I don't know if it's necessarily a flaw. So I suppose this is more geared more towards the one warning. It's a risk. It's a threat with the format that it's very easy for stories to feel disjointed. It's incredibly easy, and I would say is almost the default of the format for forays to feel like they are not a part of an ongoing story. You've got everything sort of built against you in that. Like, you're relying on players to have a lot of recalled knowledge. You're relying on them to record in the rumor mill equivalent the things that are important. And players do not always flag on what is important. In fact, I would say most of the time they do not flag on the most important things. So you and of course you've got a different pool of players each time. So going out to the awful tower in the middle of the swamp, they may get a clue then that is pertinent to the adventure later on, which they are going to miss because they're not going to be there, and they may not remember that weird quirk of the language told through flickering candlelights through the windows. Excuse the particularly
no, it checks out. It checks out.
But the sort of way around that, I would say, and the warning there is that make sure you're embedding those details in as many places as possible. Use repetition. I would strongly encourage people to look up tactics in oral tradition storytelling, the way oral traditions use repetition of details, and even just repetition of speech over and over again. Really, really helpful, in my opinion. And I would also encourage you to become comfortable with the idea that players are going to miss things, and that letting things just be a mystery out there is actually to your benefit, because they're going to wonder what the hell that thing was forever, and that is going to encourage them to keep looking. And if you have seeded those answers, those clues in enough places, they will find it. Like, just trust that it will eventually come across their path, and they will get to that story in their own way, and it'll be more meaningful because they discovered it in a weird, strange pattern. That moment of seeing a player 20 sessions later like dawn on it, and they go, holy shit, this was that thing that was connected to this person and did all of this thing, and we thought it was just some random living pumpkin in the middle of a field. Like, we didn't realize it meant all of this. Like, that's one of the most beautiful moments as a GM, in my opinion.
And John has popped a really good tip in the chat for players to bring up their own backstory. So we've got time for one very quick question. We don't have time for the last question, so you'll just have to come back and talk about it another time. So Seago asks, you are running So Below in Pathfinder 2. Any specific reason to use this rule set for your campaign?
Yeah, so
you've got 30 seconds.
I've got 30 seconds. Okay. So short answer, the OGL crisis in January. Long answer, I wanted a trad game. D&D didn't do it for me. So so Pathfinder seemed like a good fit, and it turned out to be fantastic for it.
I have one other question.
I was just going to say the last question was going to be about the interesting content that Lazy Cat's seen for So Below on Twitter. We were going to ask if you could tell us some more about it, but we don't have time for that, so we'll come back to that another time. And Andy,
my last question is, and if I was interested in joining So Below, exactly what should I do?
You're the worst, Andy. But thank you. Thank you for the plug. So I believe you've shared. Cool. You've shared the card link. So that link will take you through to start playing the wiki, the World Anvil, and our Discord. I would say the best place to jump in is join the Discord before you bother with doing anything else. Join the community, see if the vibe of the place, fits well for you. See if you like what we stand for and what we stand against. If you don't, that's chill. Get a sense of what's going on. And then if that kind of enthusiasm builds in for you, tell us what kind of weird character you want to play, and then we will cook something together and we will find a foray for you to go on.
Brilliant. Thank you so much. Well, that is the end of our stream. Thank you, Bee, for coming on to chat to us about West Marches and So Below. Thank you to Bee's players for being present in the chat and answering some questions themselves. Thank you to the two Andys. And of course, thank you as always to our lovely Discord community and our patrons who make this possible. We could not do this without you. Thank you so much. And until the next time, all that remains to say is goodbye and caw-caw, caw-caw.